Executive Suites, made possible in part by the generous support of the Rhode Island Foundation. Now, Executive Suites with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi.
Charlie Kroll was still an undergraduate at Brown in 2000 when he founded Andera, a tech startup to help banks and credit unions open new customer accounts online. The goal? Make it easier for smaller financial institutions to manage and capitalize on the digital revolution.
Juggling different systems makes everyone feel trapped. Not anymore. Andera presents OFlows. OFlows will completely change the way you open accounts and originate loans.
Over the last 14 years, Andera became one of the best-known tech firms in Providence, growing to more than 70 employees and 500 clients. And last month, it became part of a much larger enterprise when New Hampshire's Bottom Line Technologies purchased Kroll's company for a cool $48 million. So what are the lessons from Andera's success, and what's next for the man who started it? This week on Executive Suite, the founder and CEO of Andera, Charlie Kroll. Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi. Charlie, thanks for being here. And folks, don't adjust your television set. Charlie has been on a fitness regimen and has lost some weight since his last headshot, and you look great. Congratulations on that. Before we start, Charlie, I thought we saw a little of it there. That great animated video you guys put together at Andera has a great synopsis of what the company does. So before we even start talking, I think we're going to take a listen to some of the sound from that video to give you viewers at home a sense of what they do at Andera. Let's listen.
OFlows will completely change the way you open accounts and originate loans. It'll free your customers and members to work with you when and how they'd like. Let them start a deposit or a loan application at a branch, over the phone, or online, and finish it anywhere they want. With OFlows, you can collect supporting documentation with a click of a camera and store everything in a single electronic file so nothing gets lost. You can even sign up for multiple accounts at once. And yes, it's a real enterprise origination platform, canvassing our wide network to verify identity and handle the gory details of decisioning loans and talking to your core banking system. So now you can go where your customers and members are instead of sitting across a desk or behind a phone. You can get closer to the people you serve in your branches and out in your community.
Who made the video, first of all? This is pretty cool.
Yeah, a local company called Figments.
Figments, which I think is in Pawtucket, right? Yep. Yeah, so that's Rhode Island handiwork there. And you know, what people might not understand if they belong to like a really large bank like Bank of America or something that has always, you know, had pretty robust technology systems, is that for these smaller institutions, it was really hard to do this kind of stuff when the web came about, right?
Yeah, no, that's right. Besides the top 4 or 5 banks in the country, the big names like Bank of America and Chase, all the other 15,000 smaller financial institutions really don't have sufficient development resources to build their own technology. So they rely on vendors to provide things like account opening systems and online banking systems, and that's really where we fit.
And so that seems like a good summation of what you do at Andera. And what do you think is the core of what's made the company a success? Because I assume other people saw this opportunity as you did too, but you've gained more than 500 clients now. What do you think has worked so well for you guys?
Yeah, the secret for us really was focus, I think. So for a long time, we've been talking about nothing other than helping banks acquire customers. And we've been kind of hammering home the message that paper in financial services is the devil. It is everywhere. Anything you do in financial services typically requires a signature or a clipboard or a pen and some form of paper. And nowhere is that problem worse than in the account opening process. So anybody who's applied for a checking account or applied for a mortgage has experienced this package of paper that they've got to interact with, and it just makes no sense in a world where everybody's doing things online or on mobile devices that we still have to use paper for account opening. So we figured that out and we've put technology behind it. We've just made it easier and technology enabled.
And was it hard to convince, were the banks sort of, the smaller banks and credit unions, desperate for you to come by, or did it take some convincing that this was the future and that going with someone like you was the way to get there?
Yeah, it definitely took some convincing. Not only was the technology new, but our company was small. And so there was definitely a hump we had to get over. But around the 2006 and 7 timeframe, when the economy was really hot, banks were lending money really fast, and they needed deposits to fund the loans they were making. our product really helped them gather those deposits to fund the loans and to grow the way that they needed to grow, so the timing was good for us.
And we're going to talk more later in the show about the growth of the company and its progression, but I want to go right to the news of the day. I mentioned it at the top, which is that you're closing on a deal to sell Andera. It's going to be a division of Bottom Line Technologies out of New Hampshire, which is a big publicly traded financial technology service kind of firm. I'm just curious, was that a hard decision to make? You know, you are synonymous, especially in this community, with Andera. Was it hard to decide to sell it to someone else?
Yeah, it was a little hard. I mean, we've been doing this for close to 13 years now. We've had good periods, we've had tough periods, we've changed the business a few times, we've raised some venture capital, and so this is just the next chapter in the company's evolution, which frankly just made a lot of sense from the company's perspective. And we can talk about why, but yeah, of course, there was always a little bit of difficulty.
Yeah, talk about when you sat down and you had an offer, maybe multiple offers, whatever it was. What made you think, yes, this is the right time for this to be for Andera to become part of a larger enterprise?
Yeah. So I mentioned focus has really been the primary thing that's made us successful. It's also the primary thing that's held us back, because we've done one thing that we've done really well, but at the end of the day, companies need to continue growing, they need to scale, and joining up with Bottom Line really gave us access to resources that we would not have otherwise had.
What's your sense of what Bottom Line's plans are for Andera? First and foremost, people are just going to know, are they leaving Providence? Are your employees going to be going to New Hampshire now?
Right, so no, the office isn't going anywhere, the employees aren't going anywhere. There's a really exciting plan for the integration that involves putting really a lot of emphasis on what we've done in Providence and expanding on it. So the team is staying in place. There's not going to be an outflow of people to New Hampshire. It's really going to stay the same center of gravity that it was.
And when you were talking to the folks at Bottom Line, and obviously they were talking to you about what they thought they could do with it, what did they see in it? Do they want to keep Andera doing what you're doing as sort of a standalone entity, or are there parts of what you do that they want to integrate throughout the rest of what they do?
Yeah, a little bit of that. But in general, I mean, anytime you get a technology company like Andera with really good people like Andera has, typically acquirers know that they don't want to screw that up. They don't want to buy an empty office. The people are really the primary asset for any kind of really good technology company. And they've, to their credit, really acted like that, like the people are the primary asset.
How long ago did they approach you, Bottom Line?
I don't think I can go into details in the process, but we've known them for a long time. It's a small industry, and
Yeah, right. We won't push you harder on that. How about for you personally, Charlie? I know you've kind of hinted that maybe you'll be moving on from Andera, that you're staying for. What are your plans for now and for going down the line?
Well, so we just did this. The deal just closed in the last 2 weeks. I'm staying on for a period of time to help with the transition. I'll be working with Bottom Line. I'll be working with the Andera team. I'll be visiting customers. And probably later in the year, probably thinking about what's next. For me, my focus is really still on making sure that the integration is smooth.
Any hints? You think you'll stay around this region? I know you have family here and everything.
Yeah. Oh, I love it here. I mean, my family's here, my home is here. I love Rhode Island, particularly Rhode Island in the summer. So, so yeah. I mean, for me, it's not leaving Rhode Island is not something I'm thinking about.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more with Charlie about the origin story of Andera, how the company got going, and how he started it when he was an undergraduate at Brown University, when a lot of the rest of us were playing beer pong and such. So stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi, and my guest today is Charlie Kroll. He's the founder and CEO of Andera, recently acquired by Bottom Line Technologies of New Hampshire, which we were talking about before the break, and someone I've covered for years since I was a tech reporter, and you were a younger CEO than you are today. And let's talk about those early days at Andera. People love this story. I know you always have to tell it, but we'll save it for posterity here on television. You were still at Brown, and how did this company get started? And sort of because people might think you were a banker or something, but you were a student.
Right. No. So I've been doing this business since I was in college, and if you rewind the clock back to the year 2000, I was an undergrad. I was finishing up my junior year in college, and you think about what was going on back then. That was kind of the end of the dot-com bubble. And that was a time when kids in college could raise investor capital and do startups, and there was just a whole lot of hype around technology back then.
And I think we see a shot of you there with some friends in your apartment there back in the day.
They will never let me live that down for that being up there. So we actually, me and a couple of co-founders, started a business that was really totally different from the one that we ended up with today. At the time, we were focused on designing websites, back at a time when that still sounded like a good idea. There was a lot of web development activity going on back in the late 90s. And so we started a business really to do that. And the timing was just terrible. I mean, we started the company in June of 2000. We raised $300,000 from an angel investor. And right after that, the dot-com bubble burst, the NASDAQ plunged, and we found it very, very difficult to make the business work that we had tried to start. We managed to kind of bounce along the bottom for a couple of years, really struggled, nearly missed payroll a bunch of times, but ended up being able to kind of reposition the business, we call it pivot, and really realigning the company around solving this problem about customer acquisition and account opening in financial services.
And tell me how that got on your radar screen.
Well, actually, one of our early clients, when we were a web design firm, was a local community bank here called Bank Rhode Island. And we did a lot of projects for them, but one of them was building a system that allowed college students to open up checking accounts, student checking accounts, through the bank's website. And that was something we did for them. It was their idea. But we ended up kind of working with them to figure out how to turn that into a product that could be offered to other banks around the country, and then the rest is history. There was a couple of year transition where we got out of the web design business. We built up a software product around account opening, and probably by the year 2004 and 5, we had fully transitioned out of the web design business and really became more like the company we are today.
Was there any kind of aha moment for you where you're like, this is going to work, this is going to be a successful business? Because I can imagine you say missing payroll, those early days in the dot-com bubble, you must have wondered, is this thing going to last in any form?
There was an aha transition for me, I think. I'm not sure it was a moment, but really it was, my experience early on when we were right out of college selling web design in the wake of the dot-com implosion was, you'd call 10 prospects and you'd be lucky to get one call back. Nobody cared. It was not a thing that people were buying. They were certainly not buying it from young, inexperienced companies. And you ended up taking a lot of rejection back then. Once we started talking to banks about helping them get better at opening accounts online, all of a sudden the interest level was completely different, and we started finding people really wanted to learn more about it. We started finding they were calling us back to talk about it. We were getting a lot of meetings, and it was just a completely different feel than the one we had before, and that's the point we knew we were onto something.
And one thing you hear a lot in the stories about folks who came out of it, and we were talking through the break, Angus Davis, another one who went through all that, who's a local tech entrepreneur, is the sort of lack of faith among older investors at times in that post-bubble period about, well, is this digital thing going to be big, or is it really not going to be as big? Did you ever lose confidence about the business opportunity here in digital, or do you always see, okay, no, this is going to be huge even if it takes a little while for the market to get solidified?
Well, my confidence in the web design business was pretty shaky. I mean, that was a questionable business right after the dot-com bubble imploded. But as soon as we started to see the opportunity related to what we've talked about, which is how much paper there is in financial services and just how broken the account opening process is, then the confidence level for us really started to go up, and it made us much more optimistic.
And when you look, you now know that industry, financial services, pretty well. When you look in 2014, we have bankers on here all the time. They do talk about technology now much more than they used to.
Yeah.
But do you think they still have a long way to go, especially at smaller institutions, or do you think they're all now mostly caught up to where they wish they were?
Well, it's one thing and then it's another thing. So most banks have adopted online banking type of technologies over the last 5 to 10 years. Now the next wave is mobile. And so whereas we've got probably up to 80 or 90% penetration in the online banking space, we're still only at a fraction of that in terms of banks who've really fully adopted mobile banking. And so that's really the next wave to come. That will take another 5 years, and at that point, there's going to be the next thing that small banks have to adopt. So
and when you think mobile banking, are you thinking even like opening an account on your iPhone, that kind of thing?
Certainly opening an account on your iPhone, even checking balances and paying bills on a mobile device.
There must be an exhaustion with some of the CEOs when you go in to talk to them about, well, here's what's coming down the pike, guys. You need to get ready for this, too.
Things change really fast, and they're changing faster and faster, and it's quite difficult for smaller banks to keep up, actually.
Yeah. Talk about, you mentioned the pivot, the first pivot off of web design into this, and then sort of how things have changed within Andera. As an entrepreneur, I mean, is it hard to have that moment where you say, I had a vision, I was building this way on the web design thing, and I'm going to have the same name maybe on the door, but we're going to be doing an entirely different thing. How important is that?
It's hard and it's important, and there's no successful business in history that has succeeded over time without adapting. it never happens. I mean, you can't point to a big business that has gotten that way without making really significant, sometimes very difficult changes. For us, it was not a thing that we took lightly. It was a thing that we simply had to do to survive. Early on, the change from a web design firm to an account opening product for financial services, we actually ended up doing another pretty substantial pivot right around the financial crisis in 2008. Because remember, here we are selling customer acquisition system to banks who were not looking for new customers at that point, which made for a pretty difficult couple of years. We made another significant change to moving into the lending world, and banks were aggressively looking to lend at that point. And we did an acquisition of a company. We ended up integrating their technology and making another set of really big changes to talk a lot more about loan applications than we did about anything else. And so that was another big change. But again, had we not done that, the course of the company probably would have been much different.
We're coming up on a break, but one more question before we go to it. How challenging, we talked about the challenge for the banks to keep up with the technology. How challenging is it as the technology company, as the one who's supposed to know where to go and what to do to keep up as things change?
It's just very difficult. I mean, that's why specialist technology firms really have an advantage. But all the problems with finding and retaining top technology talent come into play. It's very difficult for small banks to do. It's also pretty tough for technology vendors to do, particularly in places like in Rhode Island, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
And that's what we're going to talk about exactly. A good segue. We might switch next week. All right. When we come back, we're going to talk more with Charlie Kroll about his view on the startup scene in Rhode Island at this point, and as he said, some of the issues with finding the right skilled workers to fill those jobs. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi. My guest is Andera founder and CEO Charlie Kroll. He'll be moving on from Andera, which he founded later this year now that it's been acquired by Bottomline Technologies. And Charlie, we were talking off the break. When you look around Rhode Island, we have more and more startups. We have a growing startup scene. How are you feeling? I think you've expressed some optimism lately. Tell me about your view at this point from your perch.
Well, the startup scene in Rhode Island is as good as I've seen it in the last 10 or 15 years that I've been here doing it. And part of what I like to do is just kind of point out that, there's been talk, I've heard criticism of all the attention being paid to startups over the years, but where are the jobs? Where are the results? Is this still just, people in garages and dorm rooms and whatever, or is this really beginning to move the needle economically? And what I think a lot of people don't realize is that it is. So let me give you an example. Today, right now, there are at least 5 companies that were startups not that long ago, including Andera, but I'll name companies like ShapeUp and Nabsys and Swipely and Teespring, right? That's 5 companies right there.
And all 5 have been on Executive Suite now, so people can check the archive.
On average, maybe have 80 or 90 or 100 jobs. So call that 500 jobs right now just from those 5 companies. And each of those jobs are probably paying double the median salary here in Rhode Island. So that might be 1,000 job equivalents, okay, that exist right now in Providence, and 1,000 is as if you filled up the Superman Tower, right? Like a 30-story tower in the middle of Kennedy Plaza. I don't think people think about it that way, right? That's just 5 companies. Now, there's a whole crop of newer startups that are coming along. Beta Spring itself has graduated 80 or 90 companies just in the last few years. Some of those are going to go on to be quite successful and to sort of get to the same level of scale. Many of the 5 companies I mentioned are going to continue growing. And so, whereas we might have the equivalent of 1,000 jobs right now, I don't think anybody should be surprised if 5 or 10 years from now that number turns into 5 or 10,000.
Wow.
Okay, and that really begins to move the needle. And I don't think there's really an appreciation for that, but it's a big deal.
No, you see it starting to, people, you're right, there is a lack of understanding about what's going on, and also maybe an optimism that something smaller now could lead to something much bigger later. But you also talk about what holds back growth for particularly those larger 5 you mentioned, but then the smaller ones that want to get to your size and then get on bigger. What comes out to you?
There's 2 major things, I think, that would hold companies back from being able to scale. I mean, one is talent, particularly in the technology industry, finding really high-skill technology talent, developers, designers, product managers. They are hard to find anywhere in the country, particularly hard in smaller markets like Rhode Island. Okay, so for us, like for Andera, for example, we have an office in New York just for the tech team, because we find Manhattan is a great place to hire developers. It's very competitive there, but you've got a pretty deep pool that you don't have here. And so, it's not easier for smaller companies, for startups, to have multiple offices. And that's really something that's going to be a challenge, I think. That's not an easy one to solve, but it's a challenge. The other challenge is a funding challenge. You know, you think about the evolution of a startup from, you know, 2 co-founders and a PowerPoint all the way up through being a big company. We actually are okay when it comes to the earliest stage financing, the angel investors, the very early, the smaller $25,000, $50,000 investments. Beta Spring fills that role, and then there's actually a pretty healthy environment of earlier stage investors here who will do those very young companies. Then you get to the point where, you know, you get to have much more scale, like Andera or these other companies. Out-of-state venture capitalists are happy to come into Rhode Island for 7-figure investments, you know, the $5 and $10 million investments, once a company reaches a certain level of traction. But there is a middle segment there. Once you've gotten past the $50,000 seed investors, before you're ready for venture capital, there's a role for the $500,000 angel investor. It's a role that, you know, frankly, Slater has played over the years. And
the Slater Technology Fund, taxpayer-backed venture capital firm.
As well as some of the angel groups like Cherrystone and others. But there's really not much in this state for that 6-figure investment, particularly now that Slater's got its own challenges with funding, you know, related to some of the funding issues they've had. And so, you know, we really need to find collectively, I think we need a solution to what do the very young companies do in order to get to the point where they're ready to raise venture capital, because there's a funding gap there at the 6-figure range.
And one thing that I think people might be surprised, you mentioned out of state. You know, out of state doesn't have to be that far for us, considering how much venture activity there is just north of us in Cambridge and Boston and around 495. But it sounds like for that level of investment, they don't need to leave maybe that area to find investments.
That's right. I mean, once you get to the point where you're doing multi-million-dollar venture investments, those are not local investments. You find West Coast companies investing here. You certainly find Boston companies investing here. That's not the issue. It's the younger the company, the closer you need to be your investor.
And one thing I always wonder, you talked about the skilled workers question, and why can't companies just, and a lot I think laymen wonder this question, why can't companies just hire people with potential and then train them so that they are then skilled workers? Yeah. What is the crux of that challenge, you know?
You could, in the past, you know, many companies had their own training programs. Then they would spend years developing and mentoring employees to be able to get to the skill level that you needed. There's 2 problems with them. One is that people today tend to switch jobs much more frequently. So whereas in past generations, you know, you might join a company after college and stay with them their whole career, today people switch jobs on average every 3 or 4 years. Okay? So the idea of investing significantly in the development of an employee just to have them leave makes it much more difficult. The second thing is technology changes so fast today that even if you were able to train them adequately, they really need to stay on top of things in a way that most companies just are not equipped to do. And so you rely on the colleges, the computer science programs, and frankly other employers to make sure that, you know, that employees have the skills that they need in order to keep up.
All right, Charlie, we have 15 seconds for my sponsor, the Rhode Island Foundation. You're on their Innovation Fellows board picking them, and you just did that. How'd you feel about this season?
This is the strongest crop we've had yet. 2 fantastic winners were announced last night at the reception. The program is fantastic. If anybody's not familiar with it, I encourage you to go look at it. The first 2 years, the winners have done fantastic things, and I'm sure this year's winners are going to do the same.
All right, that's all the time we have this week. Thank you, Charlie, for joining me, and I want to thank all of you for tuning in and watching this interview. Be sure to tune in next week. Our guest will be Bill Hatfield. He is the president of Bank of America for Rhode Island. We'll be talking about the banking sector some more and what he sees out there in the economy. If you missed any of this show or any other episode of Executive Suite, you can catch all of those on our website, WPRI.com. I'm Ted Nesi, and I'll see you back here next week on Executive Suite.
Great, perfect.